Greetings, listeners. Welcome to How the World Should Work, the podcast with a purpose, where we talk about things that actually matter. This is your host speaking, author, journalist, and otherwise aimlessly wandering millennial, Matt Shao. I'll be hosting alongside my good friend Johnny here. As many in my generation can probably relate to, and many who aren't, I spent several years after college trying to navigate the endlessly frustrating world of business to carve out what I was told was a successful life for myself. 6 years in the insurance industry, followed by a year of owning a small business, made me feel like I was on a decent track. Until August the 4th, 2015, when my world was turned upside down. That was the day I lost my mother and best friend, and suddenly every priority of mine completely shifted. I began to look at life from a totally different angle, and as a result, decided to drop everything and pursue writing. A dream my mother had pushed me towards my entire life, but one I was always too scared to chase. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm now a published author, a columnist at my local newspaper, an ever-growing blogger, and now we have a podcast. Which brings me to the point at hand. Here you'll be listening to topics pulled from various themes and motifs from my main writing project, the Continuity series. Although the primary purpose, as with any work of fiction, is to entertain, it also serves as a platform to express many of the thoughts and feelings we all seem to have with this crazy world we're living in. From deeper issues like social equality to lighter things such as modern dating, we'll be covering a wide array of things that we all seem to think about but don't seem to talk about very frequently. So with all that said, allow me to introduce our co-host, Mr. Gentleman Johnny Wiggins.
My name is Jonathan Wiggins. I've decided to join this project because I truly believe in what it stands for. Our goal here isn't to use this as a soapbox, so all you can just hear us talk. Instead, we hope that by talking about these issues, we can help create a better awareness of the things that affect our lives. By talking about these issues that we otherwise tend to ignore, I think we'll get a much better understanding of them, which can help us apply this newfound understanding to our lives in a meaningful way.
Good evening, folks. We are on episode 8. Welcome to How the World Should Work. Thank you for listening. Today, we are going to be talking about something that's really been in the news recently, at least, with this whole Hillary-Trump campaign stuff and, a lot of other things going on. But we're going to be talking about conspiracies and social control. We're going to try our best to be neutral, at least as much as we can. We don't want to try to argue one perspective or the other. We just want to lay out what facts and information is out there, and let people kind of decide what they think about said information. As always, the way this applies to the book, it's actually going to be a lot more. It's not very prevalent in the first one, but in the second one, there's a big conspiracy going on between the president, actually, President O'Hare, and the rest, a lot of some of the higher members of society, but again, I don't want to spoil that. So I'm going to start out here with a quote, and there are a lot of quotes on this type of thing, so I just kind of cherry-picked a few, but I might end up, as we go on, mentioning a few more. But the first one is this. The real truth of the matter is that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government of the United States since the days of Andrew Jackson. And that quote, which is pretty clearly, indicating that there is in and of itself, a conspiracy, basically is what they're talking about. And that was actually FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that said that. So I think that's kind of a powerful statement from somebody that's so respected in our history. And the other one I want to mention, for now at least, is this. It was said by Mayor Amschel Bauer Rothschild. And if you Google probably the word conspiracy, the Rothschild family will probably show up pretty quickly. I know they're touted to be one of the richest and kind of most mysterious families in the world, but he said this: "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws." And in and of itself, it's most people probably wouldn't make much of that, but if you think about what he's really meaning, is money has created, or at least the control of money has created a literal stranglehold on the political arena. When these people, and we're going to talk about the central bank in a bit here, so I don't want to get too detailed right now, but if a banker has control of, lobbying and paying and funding politicians, their voice, they're basically the ones that are going to be pulling the strings. And again, that's something that will come up here in a little bit. But so we're going to try to keep this as organized as we can in terms of how we're going to address these different topics in terms of conspiracy and social control. So we're going to start out. And by the way, Chad was going to join us, Mr. Grindstaff, but he had something come up. So tonight it's myself, Will, and Johnny. You all should be familiar with them by now. But the first thing we're going to talk about is social control theory. Now, the social control theory is an actual academic term that sociologists use to define basically how the powers that be can manipulate and sort of direct society and their constituents in a way that they deem necessary. It's not, the social control theory isn't necessarily grounded in conspiracy as much as it is just how humanity in and of itself works. Basically kind of an alpha, whatever the term that you're not an alpha is, that relationship, the master-slave kind of relationship. So to talk about the social control theory, we're going to talk about what mechanisms are used to control populations. Hopefully we can bring up some historical accounts of what had happened, and then maybe some modern accounts. So which one of you guys wants to take that for just a minute and tell what you learned when you did the research on it?
Really, what I found on it was that it is not necessarily a way to outright have control. I want to find the right way to say this real quick. It's not necessarily Big Brother, as you would think, like the name says, social control. You would think it's kind of Big Brother actually looming over and finding some way to kind of brainwash and control. Mm-hmm. Which, it's not brainwash by any means, but it's kind of the idea that if you have a certain group of people act a certain way and there is punishment or no punishment involved, like there's some sort of
let's read the definition here. So I just looked at the definition. So in criminology, for example, and this isn't the high-level social control definition, but as applied to criminology, for example, in criminology, social control theory proposes that exploiting the process of socialization and social learning builds self-control and reduces the inclination to indulge in behavior recognized as antisocial. So that's an example of how we're saying it's not necessarily the theory of social control. At first when you hear it, you think any time somebody's trying to control society, it sounds sinister, right? But as it applies in this case, it's really it's to better, like for example, like the prison population. It's to improve so people can better assimilate.
Right, and there's less criminal activity.
Exactly.
If it's carried out properly.
Right. So did you look into any of the specific sort of subplots or categories within social control? Because I know that it's broken down into several different facets of the theory, like the indirect versus direct. If you want to talk about that for a minute.
I think it was a social experiment. I don't necessarily think anything had much to do with social control, but it ties in. Do you remember the Stanford prison experiments? Did y'all ever learn about those?
That sounds familiar.
Where I forget the name of the psychologist. Crap, he's really funny. I'll have to look it up I'll look it up while I'm doing
Freud,
this.
Was it?
No. It was after Freud. But what they did was they took a group of people. I forget exactly how big it was. And they split them in half. They split half of them, made half of them prison guards and half of them prisoners.
Oh, okay.
And they set them to go.
Yeah.
And over the period of the experiment, the guards, because they were given, the equipment of the guards, they were given the uniforms of the guards, they were made into, for all intents and purposes, prison guards. And the prisoners were the same way. They were made into prisoners. They had the prison garb. They had all the freedoms, for lack of a better term.
Didn't they end up like getting depressed or something?
The guards exhibited the behavior of real prison guards. They started to beat prisoners. They started to kind of, they treated them as if they were really prisoners. They morphed into it. And wow. the prisoners did the same thing. After a little while, they became kind of complacent in the fact that, okay, we are prisoners. This, they started riots. They just started acting like prisoners in general.
That's so nice.
And that it's not necessarily social control, but it's kind of showing the...
It's a perfect example of how you can manipulate people.
Yeah.
You can manipulate from a psychological standpoint. You can essentially control or navigate or make somebody act or behave or believe a certain thing, which is an excellent segue into one of the other sub points within social control that I found, and I'm not sure who began to theorize this originally, but so a popular way to when they're talking about social control, they've identified two sort of high level ways that it's implemented. Two different ways that you can ultimately control collective groups, and they termed it informal versus formal. So, and another thing, and that's what we were talking about earlier, Will, was the indirect versus direct. It's kind of the same thing. So, a formal means of social control is a literal, like a law, for example.
Okay.
It's an overt and not behind the scenes, just straight up dictation or whatever, mandate or whatever you want to call it, where you are just literally overtly controlling the way people behave.
Okay.
So laws are the most common, and those types of things where they're not even worried. Informal social control is the more manipulative, deceitful things. So, for example, the mechanisms they use in the article I read were things like shame or embarrassment or anger that they direct those emotions towards certain behaviors. So they use a lot now in like branding. They control, like a really good example to illustrate informal control is materialism, and how if you look at branding today, and even in just throughout the entire 1900s and everything, as TV and everything developed, all of these companies that were money hungry and they really didn't care about the benefiting the world. They just wanted to fill their pocketbooks. They were putting all this information out that was shaping people's minds and making them think, that it was cool or a desirable thing to have all of these possessions, to the cigarette things. It would show the hot chicks smoking the cigarettes and making young girls want to do the same thing. So that is a perfect example of informal social control.
Okay.
And these are just points, and it's important, I think, for people to be aware of this stuff, because it's used today.
Yeah.
And it's, it is very easy to fall into that kind of sheepish mentality because that is the status quo, and it's, this is what we're fed. So, Johnny, what do you think right now? I mean, what is there anything in particular that you looked up that you thought was particularly interesting about that social control?
Let's see, social control. Yeah, I think there's tons of examples that I could go over. To think of one, look at, say, if you controlled a body of people, like a community or a country for that matter. If you were to install fear into those people, wouldn't they be more easily controlled? If you controlled that fear, you are the one promoting it. Wouldn't that...
We interrupt this message to let Matt open his can. Okay,
yes.
Sorry, continue.
But wouldn't that play in your favor if you controlled what and instilled fear into the people? Wouldn't you be able to control them and the outcome that you get?
You see it everywhere in literature and pop culture and in real life, in high society. You can. Fear, what do they say? There's the main two ways to get people to respect or allow you to control them, basically, is to fear you or love you. Mm-hmm. That's why they say, what is it better to be feared or loved? And you see that thing. Exactly. And Machiavelli would tell you, he definitely favors one over the other. He would, he argues. And did you read the
Prince?
Yeah, The Prince.
The Prince was
Good,
a great
right?
book.
He says in the book at one point, be loved when you can, but ultimately, the best mechanism to control people is fear. Because self-preservation is the characteristic in human nature that takes precedence over anything. Love has to do with pleasure. Love has to do with desire and want. Fear is dealing more with existentialism, like the very existence and protection of yourself. When you fear something, it's because it is a direct threat to you. Mm-hmm. So you want to sort those things out before you get into start loving things and enjoying things. And it's just a very fundamental psychological reality. I mean, and that's why it's more effective. Sadly.
I completely agree.
So, but before we move on, do you guys have anything else on social control? The main thing I think, that as far as in terms of or at least the point of this part of the talk is so people can be more aware and identify situations in which these kinds of things are occurring, because it's so easy to not realize it because they're so common, and life for the most part, I think most people kind of understand this, but life is a game, for a lack of a better term, and everyone plays it, whether they're aware of it or not. So the more aware of these things you are, then the better you are at the game, ultimately. So just don't use it to manipulate and be deceitful.
Yeah, Johnny.
Don't do that.
Yeah, Johnny.
Don't.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to get, and that's more of the the academic look at how society's controlled. But we're going to go more into actual conspiracy and talk about maybe some examples specifically. I don't know if you guys have any ideas on how these conspiracies occur, or how, so commonly, without people blowing the lid off of things, which is actually kind of hard to think about when you think, all these ideas like the Kennedy thing and all these, it's like, how does this stuff happen so often? Because you would think the magnitude of these events are so big that the evidence would just be screaming,
right.
But I don't know. It's just these people must be good at what they do to cover their tracks. But I don't want to get too verbose on that. Did you guys look up any particular? Do you have any personal opinions or thoughts or anything on specific conspiracies like the Kennedy assassination?
I think in regards to the Kennedy assassination, I'd say we're very well timed here with when we decided to do this episode, because just last week, I want to say, they started releasing more files on the Kennedy assassination.
No way.
Yeah,
Who?
By the federal government did.
Like the CIA?
FBI.
Where did you read this?
It's all over the place right now, because the Kennedy Something Act of 1992 gave the CIA and FBI something like 50 years from the time that, or not 50, it wouldn't have been 50,
like a statute of limitations.
They gave us, like a statute of limitations on how long they could keep all the stuff on Kennedy's
because the
assassination
conspirators would be dead by then, and it wouldn't matter.
Exactly.
Wow.
Most people are dead. Most of the people involved are dead at this point. But
that's nuts.
One thing that a lot of people are really excited to know about is Lee Harvey Oswald, and I don't. This is something they don't necessarily, or at least I didn't hear about it in just like common teachings of it. Is that he was somehow involved with the Soviet Union and Cuba, and that just days, like in the weeks before the assassination, he had traveled to New Mexico, and met with two representatives of a representative of the Soviet Union, a representative of Cuba. And then, just weeks later, he had shot and killed John F. Kennedy. And those papers haven't been released yet, but there are more, nobody knew about that meeting until a couple years back when the right files were released.
So they're saying that Russia and Cuba were involved.
Well, the Soviet Union, back when it happened, went ahead and covered their tracks and said, this is what we met with him about. We don't have anything to do with the assassination.
Right.
So they've been cleared.
Oh, because they knew it would come up, so they just
exactly.
Nipped it
they
in
went
the
ahead and nipped it in the bud.
Yeah,
I know, right? But there they are, popping up in our history again in something like presidential something or other.
I don't know, man, but Putin's a brilliant navigator.
Yeah, right.
Hate him or not, but he's a smart man.
He's a smart man. No, but no, I just think that's really cool that that we'll know. that by a certain point this year, we'll know all there is to know about the Kennedy assassination.
Oh,
yeah. So
High five for that.
I know, right?
This message brought to you by Kofifi.
You don't stick with that.
So never forget Kofifi.
Kofifi.
So yeah, actually, because that's interesting. Because I mean, if you look at just Google or YouTube a conspiracy video on the JFK thing, and what the majority will try to paint it in the CIA, how it was against him, which I'm actually gonna. So basically, before I read this part of the speech, did we ever? I thought I remembered reading this. Did I ever read this in one of the episodes? The speech people say they got JFK killed.
Yeah, you did.
I did
it was one of your quotes.
That's what I thought. Yeah. But, I mean, it applies in this situation. I guess in that case, I'll briefly kind of go over it. But most conspiracy theories say that he was killed because his whole goal, his platform, kind of behind the scenes, but in the speech, he actually kind of says it out loud, was to, one, actually tackle this whole central banking thing. And if you look at the parallels, you know, they have all those things between the Lincoln and the Kennedy assassination and similarities. Mm-hmm. Both of them, and this is a true part, but both of them wanted to address the financial stranglehold that, you know, bankers have. So that was one thing, obviously, that would motivate somebody to want to knock him out. But yeah, this is basically what he said. And he was talking specifically about an enormous conspiracy that involved every facet of society. He said the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths and secret proceedings. We decided long ago the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers that are cited to justify it. That sounds like something we could probably apply to today. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much they find to justify the atrocities that, you know, are committed in the world. But he said we are opposed, this is the main part, we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, subversion instead of elections, intimidation instead of free choice, guerrillas by day instead of, or guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. And he goes on and he basically he literally says straight up that, you know, the monetary system, the legal system, the business, you know, world, they're all in bed together and they're all coordinating to, I mean, that's the social control, you know, to a T.
Right.
And a lot of people say that was why
he got shot.
And logically, it does make sense. Yeah. You know, so, but what about you, Johnny? Did you look up any particular conspiracy theories, or do you have thoughts on any of the others?
Well, actually, the JFK and Abraham Lincoln. Did you ever see the similarities in the two assassinations?
Yeah.
The Ford Theater, the Ford vehicle.
It's some eerie, ridiculously like coincidences. You know,
you go down the list and you're like
the names of the guy, or like something like the two names of people involved were the same but reversed. Like the first name and last name of the other guy was the same name, but it was in reverse. It's just crazy stuff.
And so much stuff, like, it's to the point where it has, like, the whole list going down, and it's like, okay, well, this is weird at first, and then you keep reading, and you're like, okay, this is odd. And then this is getting really weird.
And then you're like looking over your shoulder.
You're like, hang on. This doesn't really make sense.
It's kind of scary.
It is. And there's a couple different ways you can look at a conspiracy theory. It's the one is the conspiracist who looks at it as can't trust anybody. Whoever, I don't care what the rest of the world thinks. I know this is true.
Tinfoil hat.
Yeah, and they're hiding it from us. Tinfoil hat. Yeah, and then you have the guy that actually takes all all options and
unbiased.
And, the unbiased into consideration and looks at the actual evidence that goes along with what they're talking about and says, okay, well, is there enough evidence to keep this theory alive, or is it going to die and you're going to leave it to the conspiracy?
And that's the approach I think that everyone needs to be more mindful of. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and then actually, I'm glad you said that because, and so far, that's the NBC of tonight, so far at least, because basically every opinion that we have is fundamentally and unavoidably are influenced by our own biases and our own, like that one time you were talking about how Facebook feeds one, if you're on the right, they feed you the right, that's what's going to happen. So, I mean, naturally, and even subconsciously, we form our opinions to correlate with our priorities and our own thoughts, So if we look at the same piece, if you and I look at the exact same piece of evidence, and I think one thing and you think the other, we're both going to find different parts of that evidence to justify our own point of view. Mm-hmm. So I think that, people do need to make a much stronger effort not everyone, but overall about being neutral and being legitimately objective, without allowing their own opinions and predispositions to cloud their judgment.
Right. And I think if you actually believe something and what you're talking about, I think it is your job to provide that evidence to persuade or explain why you're right.
Yeah, the onus is on the person making the argument. Mm-hmm. That's like, one of the more common God existential arguments is, well, you can't prove he's not there. And so a lot of times that argument is, and the absence of evidence is not evidence of existence. It's that. So, and that's, I've never understood how that even logic to the person making that argument makes sense. But, that's exactly the kind of the point there. But, there was something, when you were saying what was the point, the first point you made there? There was something you had said that's triggered something that I wanted to mention.
What's that?
When you first started talking about the Lincoln Kennedy thing and how people take the evidence and so that's one thing I wanted to say was one way I think we can kind of separate these conspiracy theories are the tin hat versions and then the legitimate versions where that's more the approach that we're taking. Right. Because when you look at, first of all, conspiracy theory, the term has been hijacked by people that participate in conspiracies, specifically because when they call somebody a conspiracy theorist, it can ridicule them. Right. That's a mechanism of social control. They've formulated this opinion.
There's this image
just because of the very term conspiracy theorist. It almost sounds like it's ridiculous, like your credibility is gone, Mm-hmm. And that's been carefully done by people that want to, commit these atrocities. But there are the ones like, and let's kind of lay these out. Like, what are the tinfoil hat ones? Because I think a lot of these are actually pretty funny, so it's sort of entertaining to talk about them.
Yeah.
Like the aliens taking over the lizard man, the reptilians.
The reptilian race, President Obama. Kenya. The moon landing.
Right, the other good, perfect one. Like, we never went to the moon. Okay. And have you watched those videos?
I have seen the videos.
It's amazing how they put so much effort and thought into it, where it actually kind of makes sense when you look at it. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. But, like, really? How many times has John Glenn been on documentary saying, I walked on the moon, I'm pretty sure we were there,
Yeah, and I think the big thing is that we kind of need these conspiracy theorists because at times we do need to be challenged about what we know to be the truth.
Absolutely.
So sometimes it may be, the moon landing and we haven't really went to the moon. It may be stuff like that, but that's what you're going to
news anchor that always gets a lot of press coverage. Names,
but I think we do need these people to challenge these ideas and from what we know is the truth.
You're exactly right.
I think we need these people.
Yeah.
But
pioneers. Yep. But you're exactly right because these people are the ones that are on the front end of the. They're asking why. They're asking the ones, and even the guys that are kind of ridiculous and funny and entertaining to listen to. But the whole point of it is to just get the wheels turning in people's heads. To bring attention to it and to actually create the beginning of somebody thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because how many have people in society just walk through life and really just don't even, I don't know if it's they don't care, they're just totally oblivious to what's going on, that, the world would be a much better place if this were a priority and these types of things were more carefully and legitimately considered. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people don't. Is because it kind of sucks to realize how the world actually works.
Right. And the key is to be upfront about these things. And if there was no room for questioning, then or if there is room for questioning, that's what brings out these theorists that come out and say, hey, maybe that's not the way that it actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you were upfront and honest and showed actual proof and evidence about the way things actually went down, then there would be no room for those.
Yeah. Like show them a friggin' moon rock you came up with, throw it at the guy, say, hey, where'd I get this at, huh, buddy?
Yeah.
Tell me I didn't go to the moon.
Let's do that.
But I think, what was the point I had? I'm going to throw this point out again. There was something, again, I was going to mention when you were just saying that. But yeah, so anyway, I mean, we could go on and on and on, but some of the other, what do you guys think? I mean, some of the other, quote, tinfoil hat theories, because it's kind of funny to look, listen and kind of read up on these things. Mm-hmm. That's why I wish Chad had have made it, because before tonight, he had sent me a lot of this, this information on this 4chan and Pepe the Frog thing.
Pepe the Frog,
all this thing. But if you, honest to God, like if you look it up, just Google again or YouTube, just those two things together, Pepe the Frog and 4chan. Just do that, at some point and see what pops up, and it's all of these.
He became like the most racist meme ever.
Yes, and it was intentionally done by the left.
Yeah.
And Hillary, they literally on this Pepe the friggin' Frog, which is, if your listeners, if you aren't familiar with Pepe the Frog, because I wasn't until Chad had sent me this, it's a meme. It's a frog that's got a funny looking frowny face, and you can use it for anything. Mm-hmm. And the left kind of hijacked it because, this full 4chan revolution, which I'm not even really familiar with that website, but evidently it's like the go-to meme place. And the left eventually, there was some organization, like legitimate organization that declared it a hate symbol.
That when the creator, I think it was like a government. Like, it was like somebody.
It was the institution that identifies hate symbols.
Yeah.
It was whatever the authority is on that particular kind of thing. They declared this frog a white supremacist hate symbol, specifically because of the way the left portrayed it.
And there was actually I won't say around the time that happened, but it may have been quite a bit after. The creator of the meme, who never intended on Pepe the Frog going the way he did, actually drew up a little comic, like a little like 1-page thing, and he was killing Pepe the Frog so that he couldn't cause any.
Like I read that he thought it was fun. Like he's like, I'm glad he's getting some FaceTime.
Yeah, he enjoyed that, but
he's not he was like, he's not a supremacist. He's a friggin' frog that I created.
Well, that was this thing when he killed him. He was like, until I can find a way to bring him back, and he'll be used the way he was intended to be used.
In all his glory.
I'm killing him off. But I mean, that doesn't stop.
Yeah, but I mean, the funny part about it, and this is the tinfoil thing. Like the conspiracy goes so much deeper because people, like, apparently there was an old Egyptian god named Kek. Well, actually, let me start over. So, a big, on the internet, apparently, there's, you know how people say LOL?
LOL.
Evidently, KEK is another, like, it's like Korean or something for LOL, so Kek was commonly used on the internet and memes and stuff because of that connection.
Right.
Well, coincidentally, there's it's some sort of Egyptian god named Kek that's a frog. So they made this ridiculous tie into the two, and now apparently this frog is it's like the symbol of chaos is what they're calling it. And they've idolized it, and they're literally a small religion almost forming around this symbol, which is absolutely absurd and hilarious and depressing all at the same time.
Welcome to the human race.
But that's the really interesting thing, because in what he sent me, there was a clip from Joe Rogan's podcast, which is one of the biggest podcasts on the planet, and he had Jordan Peterson on, who's a Harvard psychologist, and that's fine. He basically was talking about how the world is kind of, I don't want to say drifting, but it's quickly charging into a kind of chaotic, not anarchist, kind of, but a chaotic environment. He said if you look around at things in the world and what's happening, you've got Trump. He basically called Trump a troll. I mean, Trump trolled the world and won. Trump shared a tweet, and that was one of Hillary's biggest they tried to put it out there and like criticize him for it because he did it because of how ridiculous it was that they made this frog such an enemy. So he tweeted it, and it was like it said deplorables, and it was a triangle where they had put the faces in Photoshop of Trump in the front center, and it was like a ducks fly together V kind of thing, and the frog was directly to his right, like in front of like Priebus and all that. Yeah. And he shared that he tweeted it. Because it was funny. It was, and they tried to demonize him for it. So he was talking about how Trump's trolled the world.
He has,
which he has, and that's what he was saying is the biggest thing that's indicative of this kind of realm of chaos that we're kind of going into. And he said it's exciting, but it's also scary because anything when the world is in that state, and he's talking about it's happened before and whatnot. But when the world's in that state, anything can happen, which is both awesomely exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
So, but so anyway, that was another verbose way of talking about one of the tinfoil. But that one's actually grounded in reality. So.
Yeah, no, it is for sure.
But before we move on, do y'all have any other conspiracy? What do y'all think of the 9/11 thing? You know,
I think it shows, considering the massive tragedy it was as an American citizen, even though I was very young when it happened. So
how old were you when it happened?
I was in 3rd grade. So, like, to me, it didn't exactly have much gravity because I didn't really know a whole lot about. I mean, of course, it had the oh shit this.
But you remember where you were.
I was in
That's our generation's JFK assassination.
I was in I was in my homeroom teacher's class. I don't know that I was in homeroom. I may have been in like English because she was my English teacher also. Miss
Thompson's Algebra 2 class is where I was.
Was that where you? Miss Shalata. That would have been her classroom. I really don't remember which subject it was at the moment. Yeah, I just remember all the teachers kind of huddled over the desk and were like watching something on the computer, all crying.
Right.
And I didn't really. They wanted to protect us, so they didn't tell us outright. I learned later that afternoon when I went home because my dad was in New York, 4 blocks away.
He's a pilot,
right? Yeah, he was stuck in New York for a couple of weeks, I want to say.
United, what didn't they use?
They used the United planes almost exclusively. I want to say.
And Will's father is a United pilot,
he
so
is.
That
Yeah.
fit close to him.
Well, it was. I know from what I've been told, one of the first things that happened was my aunt called my mom because she couldn't get through to my dad because phone lines were so blocked up in New York.
That was the worst.
So they were all freaking out because they couldn't reach my dad, and they finally got through to my dad. And he told me later, like, you know, he woke up and he could see the smoke, and he could, I mean, you know, he was in New York. He was 4 blocks away. He was,
really?
I mean, I assume he was freaked out. I've never asked him straight up, you know, were you scared? You know, right. I can only assume he was. I would have been in the situation. He said it was crazy to be there because they had traffic in that area completely closed off. There were no cars, but it was crazy. The streets of New York in that area were empty.
Really?
They were empty. It was the only time he's ever seen the streets of New York empty. There were plenty of people still, because foot traffic was, but vehicles were, the streets were cut off. And I hadn't learned that until we were talking about it a few months ago, and he told me that. But I think, to be entirely honest, if for an American to make up something, I mean, that'd be like saying Pearl Harbor was faked.
Right.
You know, and I know they're two kind of, well, Pearl Harbor wasn't faked because look at all the kamikaze pilots that clearly slammed into planes. But it's the same concept on, there's this been...
So you're saying it's disrespectful.
Well, I think it's disrespectful as hell to say that it would be...
But what if it were true, though?
If it were true, then okay, it's true. Like, I would think it's terrible and it were just irreprehensible. Because a lot of these are the idea that, like, for instance, I saw somewhere the Pentagon, there's one of them thinking that it was an inside U.S. job, like a missile from a U.S. silo somewhere had shot off and hit the Pentagon. And
we talked about the videos, right? I mean, there are some pretty extensive theories that get into this, but I'm not saying I lean one way or the other. I think the government obviously does things. Like I said earlier, honestly, I think it would make sense that because if you watch these videos, I don't personally think that they blew up the strike, but I could see it in a situation where they were warned, because they were. If you actually look at it, there were indications that they were planning an attack and that planes were going to be involved.
That was a big thing,
I could see it in a situation, because in that point in time, we really wanted to go into the Middle East because we really needed to create, a better kind of stranglehold and reason to create all these bases and give us access to be accessible anywhere in the world.
Well, that was actually, that kind of circles back around to being warned, on the topic of being warned, circles back around to the Kennedy assassination, because in those papers that have been recently released, it's been shown that the FBI and the CIA had a lot of, Lee Harvey Oswald, him killing JFK was not the first time he'd fallen into their scope.
Right.
He was a suspicious person for a while before that happened. They honestly, I don't remember the specific details because it's been a couple days now since I've looked at it, but they had pretty good reason to watch him and make sure that he didn't do anything super suspicious, like buy a rifle and blow the president's head off.
Yeah. Which makes you wonder how he accomplished it.
Yeah, I know.
And it almost makes you wonder because there was some sort of conspiracy.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's kind of my point with the 9/11 thing, is I could see it where they were warned, but they saw that as if that happened, that'd be a good excuse to declare. And this is what the main thing, I think, is when you declare a war on terror, that gives you... Because everyone knows that war is a very profitable thing for governments and the powers that be. And having a war on terror is like the dream of a person that wants to control society. It's a war that never really ends. Because you can't end that war. You can't end it, because terror will always exist. Always. So I could see that, and that's kind of a toe in the water, so to speak, of that conspiracy theory. It doesn't get that deep into the, blowing up the skyscrapers of themselves. Right, yeah. So... But I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know if we ever will find out any of these things anyway.
I feel like...
But it is important to at least consider the possibilities.
Yeah, well, and with something like 9/11, I feel like it's pretty well written out that there wasn't much of an inside job. I know that, once again, who knows? If there was, they would have covered it. We'll never know. But,
but to your point earlier, I don't think the guys that come up with these... I wouldn't necessarily take it as... they're being disrespectful directly.
Well, no, they're just...
Because their intention, honestly, is to try to uncover sinister plots. So they don't really mean it as a... It may be interpreted that way because, there's a lot of sensitive feelings involved because of the atrocity. But, to their credit, maybe they're a little getting ahead of themselves and overstepping themselves. But
just taking on all the possibilities.
They're just trying to help.
And some of them are just trying to get attention, too. And I don't...
screw them.
Well, yeah, but I know... Well, that's part of it. Some of these people that come with these crazy conspiracy theories, they're just like, this idea is going to go viral, and then everybody will want to know who came up with it first.
Let's come up with the most ridiculous theory.
Yeah, and those social media mongers...
Yeah, the dregs of society.
Yeah. That's no good. That doesn't do anybody any good.
No, it doesn't.
But the people that are actually checking to see if those facts are true because lack of better evidence leaves them to do so, then I can agree.
They're just trying to help. Yeah.
I'm not going to shame them and say, oh, you're a tin hat.
Right.
See?
Yeah.
And that's another point that we were talking earlier about when people's biases get in cloud their judgment. Mm-hmm. When that happens and you have that sensitive of a response to that kind of... And then you're going to have that sensitivity when somebody comes up and says it's an inside job. Because it's almost like, in their perception, from their point of view, it's like you're kind of watering down the magnitude of the event.
Right. That's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, but again, it's also important for that person to try to understand as much as possible that that's not the intention. Because that's really what people need to do more, is be aware of the intention behind what's going on.
Right. Most of the time, they're just trying to open your eyes to a new perspective.
Right. And people shouldn't be held at fault for that.
You shouldn't be shaming these people.
Right. Exactly.
Take their insight into consideration and actually evaluate what they have to say and see if it's worth
looking into further.
Yeah. Exactly. Just look at it objectively, and and again, make sure you're aware of the intention. Because there's no reason to stress over somebody that gives you no reason to stress.
Yeah.
Just because of your own bias. So, but anyway, that was another can opening here. Any other conspiracy theories y'all want to talk? All right, so the tin hat. Let's get out of the tin hat. So unless you want to. Anything else before we?
Ooh, I've got one that would have actually. It ended. We're in 20. It ended 5 years ago now. But the Mayan calendar.
Oh yeah, they made a movie about that.
That was my favorite. I loved the Mayan calendar. Just to
like
think
Y2K.
Yeah, Y2K. It was like all those big things. I loved thinking that with me, it was just like with the Mayan calendar. The reason I love it so much is because It kind of lines up a little bit. Some of the things on the calendar kind of. I mean, they do. They line up.
Their calendar started over. They have a try.
Just start over.
It's a calendar that, if you look into it, it's like 3 main parts, and all it was the second one transition.
Yeah. Okay. And the third. That's right.
That's all it was.
Yeah. That's why it ended. But no.
Right,
yeah. I really liked it just because it does. They did a good job of.
It was fun.
It was fun. Yeah. It was really
and
fun.
it created a lot of suspense.
It did.
And its suspense is exciting, and it's fun too.
It's like, ooh, is this really gonna happen?
Yeah, like I feel bad for the people like built bomb shelters and like bought thousands of cases.
They're like
of water.
in a total fallout situation.
Like they're still drinking the water they bought back then. Today, it's like
in a can,
sealed
right?
off.
Yeah.
Luckily, all that stuff stays. So, the Mayan one is a really good example. Actually, there's always a apocalyptic theory going on. They look at, and that's one thing. Like in the Nostradamus quatrains and stuff, you can interpret those things however in the world.
Have y'all seen it's a Keanu Reeves movie? No, it's not Keanu Reeves. It's No, it's the one, the arcs. The world's ending. What is the name of it? I can't remember right now.
Is it like a modern movie? Or?
Oh, it was 2012. It was the movie 2012.
That's the one we were talking about. The one that movie with what's his name? The kind of popular but not as
John Cusack.
John Cusack. That's the movie we were talking about.
I was gonna say since we're talking about the cookie cutter kind of tinfoil hat guy, Woody Harrelson's character.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that. Just
that's
to think
exactly right.
That's like
perfect example.
It really is. I mean, that's what you think about when you think of a tin hat guy.
Woody Harrelson.
Oh, he's great. He's in something coming up that's gonna be.
He's
pretty
in
awesome.
Everything now.
He's gotten really popular.
True Detective, man. That was a great one.
Although
Matthew McConaughey.
You ever seen one of his Kingpin? One of the first ones he really was known for.
Seen that forever.
Dude, that movie's fantastic. That was really in unison, by the way. I could tell.
we could go on this for days, but so I really want to get into the most significant part of this talk, because this is the part I think that requires a very open-minded approach to this information, and I'm absolutely certain that plenty of opinions after hearing it would probably be, this guy sounds ridiculous, but I promise, it's grounded in logic and legitimate thought and consideration, and that is and by our I mean literally the world's slavery, really, for lack of a better term, to money and dependence on fiat currency. And that's really one thing that I would like for this episode to legitimately examine, and how money has because that's the thing. I think it's important to understand that every single thing that we've ever had and created and hated or enjoyed in society and in life was at one point in time discovered or thought of or conceptualized by a human being.
Right.
By the mind of a human being. Because God, if you believe in Him, or the universe, if you believe in whatever didn't produce money. Mm-mm. That was man-made. Thought of by a human being. I guess probably what happened was they developed into a barter system, and somebody was like, it would make a lot of sense is to have this stuff. And they probably started out with some sort of resource like gold or something that was a scarce supply.
All the coins of the early ages, a lot of money.
Well, that's even it's unless it's like made out of gold or silver. I mean, that's even the difference. Now I'm going to look up the difference because it's important here between currency and fiat. Currency is an obvious one. I mean, currency is simply a mechanism or a tool to transact something commerce. I mean, something you can prescribe worth to.
Right.
But fiat money, on the other hand, is.
I was wondering what that meant.
So fiat money. So basically, the gold standard used to be the common standard, right? That was a currency. Fiat money is when people somehow, for whatever reason, decided that paper money, and it was based off of not an intrinsic value, but a perception of that value.
Okay.
In fact, the definition of fiat money, and I wouldn't even know this if I didn't major in economics, to be honest, but inconvertible paper money made legal tender by government decree.
So basically,
it's worthless. It's a worthless item that's worth something because of the perception that something has
arbitrary
has
value.
assigned to it by the government.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So there is no legitimate value in
just
terms
a
of
piece of paper with a number one on it.
You can't do anything with money.
Right.
Essentially.
Exactly.
And if you think of Micronesia, they used to use rocks,
Yeah.
huge rocks
Yeah.
that are bigger than cars, that
Really?
sat on a beach, and that was their currency.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell did they move those?
You don't. You
How the hell
only-
did they build Stonehenge?
Okay, I'm gonna own this place because of that rock on the beach 3 miles
that's
away.
my
Right,
rock,
my
yeah.
rock.
It's mud.
if you can
What do they do?
see
Do they like
it's
sit around with
bigger.
their guards and defend it or something? Like you siege the rock? Whoever's
I don't
king
know.
of the hill.
Right. Yeah. Just this is my rock, and
doesn't
you
it
can't
amaze
have it.
you like the stuff that's happened in history? Like,
Human ingenuity goes to crazy.
human
lengths
ingenuity and
sometimes.
human stupidity both, man. Both.
I don't know. I think the rocks is pretty creative. If you
Yeah.
ask me.
Whoever decided, whoever was sinister and manipulative enough to come up with that ploy was brilliant. I mean, you have
That's
to
true.
respect that
Yeah.
because that's what he did. That's what these people do with money. They think of a way. They literally will go to a drawing board and think so hard and talk about it with their again they're conspirators. How can we control people? And they're so open-minded, they're so smart that they will take the most ridiculous things and actually implement them successfully because they care that much and they're so convicted about controlling people.
And that's how smart they are. They can take literally a piece of paper and put value
Right.
to it. So now, instead of this little green sheet of paper, it now has value in your life, and now you're going to work for it.
You care about it.
$7.25.
And we all, seriously, all live based upon that green piece of paper.
Yep.
Life only matters.
Everything revolves around money. Literally revolves
does.
around money.
You can only live as much as you can afford to.
Yeah.
So
And so the first part of this whole part, and again, I want this to be a very serious and focused discussion because this is so important and it's so huge. It's something that's so daunting of a topic, but it has created a complete, a grip on the entire world by these people. So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of a central bank. And basically, a central bank, if you don't know, is a big, basically centralized, as the name implies, controlling organization that produces money and controls interest rates and those types of things. They basically dictate the monetary policy of any given country, or in the European Union's example, group of countries or whatever.
they set how many bills and coins are in circulation.
They control the amount of money in society. That is what the central bank will do. So basically that's what a central bank is. But so one of the things, because in and of themselves, I mean, a bank doesn't seem like a sinister organization, right? But when you consider the magnitude or the degree of power that a institution would have, if you control the one thing that people value more than anything in society, and that's part of the social control part we'll get to eventually, is that's an extremely intoxicatingly powerful, feeling, I imagine.
Right.
And something that should be much looked at much more closely than it is. I know that financial industries are one of the more regulated ones, but they're not really regulated properly. And that's because people that control regulation are people that benefit from these organizations, and it kind of all ties in, as JFK would tell you. But just to first illustrate the danger, I guess, because if it functions the way they're supposed to, a central bank isn't an evil organization. But the fact that all of these people, and I'm going to actually read a few quotes here that illustrate, or will basically straight up tell you that these organizations and institutions were one of the worst things for humanity in history. So, and Thomas Jefferson was actually one of the biggest opponents of a central bank. So I'm just going to read just a couple of the things that he said about them. The end of democracy and the defeat of the American Revolution will occur when government falls into the hands of the lending institutions and moneyed corporations. In fact, this whole point is one of the reasons people seceded from England. Monetary policy. Some of the other things, I believe that, this is probably his most famous quote on them. He said, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a moneyed aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power of money should be taken away from the banks and restored to the people whom it properly belongs. And I'll digress on Thomas Jefferson here, but one of the reasons, again, that Lincoln and Kennedy were probably murdered was because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to create a system where money was controlled by the people, and there was a finite supply, which would actually give you a better belief in the value of it. Because when you have an instrument that technically the Fed could just flood the market with more money,
right?
What is really the safety or the security in that perception of how much it's worth? Because at any moment they could print more.
Just change.
But when you have a finite amount of something, you can definitively say how much it's worth, specifically because there's a scarce amount of it. And that will not change.
And you look back, and then we abandoned the gold standard.
Right. That's why a lot of people argue for that. It's because of that controllable, finite. Sure, you can mine it every now and then, but I mean that's kind of, So it's a much more finite resource that you can concretely look at for value.
But you look at the way the economic system is today, and you see that a lot of, like, the majority, percentage-wise, of America's wealth goes to a certain amount of people, individuals. That 1%
that control this,
and that know how to use their money to keep making money.
And it's not even that. It's just that, I mean, they're also the people, and this is why it's such a daunting task to try and even consider taking a step towards progress on this issue, because they are the people. Not only do they control the money and the supply of money, they also control the regulation and the laws and the legislation of money. So how do you even begin to tackle that monster? It's one of the big, and I think that's one reason that it hasn't been addressed. It's because one, the people that do it get killed.
That's true.
I'm being dead serious when I'm saying that. The people that try to do it end up getting killed, and the ones that want to won't, because of how big of a task it is.
Well, not to mention the second that somebody who's high and above that can touch this kind of legislation or whatever it would end up being, the second they start doing that, the public catches wind of it, and Joe Dirt, redneck, whatever, that doesn't want money messed with because it works just fine the way it does now, as much as he likes to think it does in his little bubble of a world, starts to throw a fit. And so any person about to touch that who's in Congress goes, oh, well, you know what? We're just going to let things keep going. They become
toxic. Or they get shot. The response when somebody does try to kind of fly the coop is the system totally ridicules and destroys them. And it ruins the lives and credibility of that individual for doing what is really what a good human being would do. And that's the biggest issue, I think, is we say this in probably half of our episodes. These people, literally, clinically, they're psychopathic. They're sociopathic. They're people that chemically, from a cognitive level, do not feel
the same way,
feelings. They do not feel feelings. They don't have that ability to, because of the way their brains, I guess, chemically are structured. So, on one end, it's almost like, can you really fault them, because they don't understand because their brains simply don't process.
They can't.
So they don't have the ability, even if they wanted to empathize, because all you can do is describe to them what it feels like to feel remorse.
Right.
And they'll be like, oh, it sounds like it sucks, but they don't know. They
can't. They'll never.
So understand. It's just, there's so many moving parts to that, and how it has resulted in this stranglehold, like I've said, of our entire world. So, I don't know. The central bank thing is one thing. Okay, so let's talk about the Fed for just a minute on that topic. First of all, there's four main central banks in the world. The Federal Reserve, that's the obvious one, the one in America, of which there's 7 spread out, in the country. The others are the Bank of England. We all know about that. The European Central Bank, which is, I believe they're the ones that are producing and control the euro. By the way, pounded for England for actually saying, hey, we don't like you guys anymore, see you later. Brexit.
Brexit,
And honestly, I don't know the politics behind that, but you got to respect them for the balls of doing it, man. I bet you wouldn't see the French do it. No, I'm just kidding. All right. No, I like it, the French. And the fourth is the Bank of Japan. And Japan, again, deserves credit for being such a small nation, but having such an economic impact.
Because all the technology comes from there.
Yeah. But I mean, you got China, which is the biggest country, the most populated country in the world.
That's your industrial manufacturing right there. Right. China, your Japanese.
You don't see Japan with a lot of farmland, It's more rural. But I mean, that's. I'm looking at my notes here, on the central banking point, and just defining it as examples abroad, which the Big Four obviously kind of lay out. There's tons. I mean, there's a Wikipedia article actually, the list of pretty much every country ends up developing one, but they're always the revolutionaries always tell them not to. And in fact, a lot of revolutions occur because of this very reason. They have a central bank that's controlling them. The guys that kind of get it and that are smart enough to organize an effort to revolt, succeed, create it, and then you got guys like Jefferson. Hey guys, we did this for y'all. Don't screw it up again. Yeah. Don't let it happen. And then inevitably it'll happen again, and then you'll see another revolution. And it just happens over and over and over. What do you think, Johnny? Did you look into the central banks?
I did, and I get kind of what goes on behind everything and the reason why, if you were leading a country and if you were at the top of society, why you would support such a system. But my question was actually for you guys. What alternatives would you give to central banking if you wanted to go around the whole idea of a...
what could we do differently?
Yeah, what would you guys
do you want us to start with that, Will? Because that's the question, kind of, that when I started here was saying when it's kind of far-fetched and ridiculous. That's what most people will probably think. Mm-hmm. But that's what my answer is going to be, so I'm going to let Will...
I think one way I would... your question is just how to not have to deal with central banking?
I was just wondering if you had an alternative in mind.
Right. I would go if I had an alternative, I'd go 100% crypto. Bitcoin,
like
Zcash, Ether, stuff like that.
I don't know much about. So why? What would be the benefit of that? Well, because isn't Bitcoin a technical?
It is unregulated.
Who is controlling the amount of Bitcoin out there?
The people, the user. There is a finite. I mean, when I say finite, there's a crap ton of it. Like, there's a lot of Bitcoin. There is a finite number, though. Eventually...
We like that PG badge.
Yeah, right. Eventually, Bitcoin... Well, I'm not going to say it's necessarily going to run out, but it will stop creating, only
it's just digital, right?
It's just digital, but it only... There's a cap. And they have actually recently... I've been getting emails about it because I'm a member of, Coinbase and all these... Bitcoin of America, stuff like that.
But who caps it, though? How is it capped?
If they could ever, they don't really know who created it, but
I'm sure it makes sense. It's just,
it makes sense. It makes sense if you look into it, but it's.
But is there an organization though that caps
there is there's a blockchain to it. No, it's not an organization. No, it's not. It's how the program. Bitcoin's like a program.
Okay.
These they're programs, and whoever writes them writes a certain code into them, and this is how they get produced. And
right.
My buddy's even got a mining rig. Like he has.
So, who regulates that?
Right.
They're unregulated.
Well, that's the thing. But I guess the obvious question would be, isn't that hackable?
It is hackable. They get hacked a lot. And what sucks about it is when they get hacked, they get stolen, they go away. You can't get them back. They're not insured like banks or anything where if the money gets stolen, it gets given back to you.
Yeah.
But they're protectable. I mean, it's easy to protect your cryptocurrency because you can take it, you buy it on your phone, right?
And it's audited by the people.
Well, yeah, exactly. But if you buy it, you get these little things called they're I think it's called keys, Bitcoin keys, and they're like little
fascinating.
Yeah, right. They're like little USB drives. You plug them into the device that you bought them on. You transfer the Bitcoin from there to this device, which is seriously just like a USB drive with no sort of outgoing signal or anything, so they can't be hacked. They're in your
Jason
pocket.
Bourne movie, kind of.
Yeah, sort of. Well, it has that feel to it, but
like your worth on a thumb drive. It's like
exactly. And but no governments have their fingers in these. These aren't regulated by the FDIC or something like that.
There's no insurance whatsoever.
There's no insurance on it. At the same time.
But I mean, is there a way you think if Bitcoin became if society got to the point where Bitcoin was the status quo, the currency, surely there would be plenty of policies that were considered and could change. Could it be? Is there a way you could even fathom to create that kind of audit system and secure it?
Yes, I think.
But it will always be based on the internet, so obviously there's.
It'll always be based on the.
There will always be.
There's some sort of. I mean, now just the fact that our banking is so integrated into the internet and stuff. We have online banking. We buy things online. I mean, everything we do with our money is hackable now. If you think about it.
And to the point though, I mean, it doesn't get any worse than where we're at right now.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
So I mean, that is in terms of Johnny's question, the alternative.
Yeah, I would go
the best alternative. I mean, could we?
And just like there's plenty of just like regular money. How you've got U.S. currency and there's plenty of different types of cryptocurrencies out there. They all have different values, and you'd have to learn how to play with them. Like they are something you can't just you can just jump into it and start using them, because I know that's how I did it at first. I did very minimum research. I just used it because there are certain websites and stuff that you buy stuff off of them, you get a discount for using Bitcoin and stuff like that. So
really? See, I'm glad that you're explaining, because I mean I've seen it and heard about it so long, but I've never really taken the time to familiarize myself.
I mean, I'm definitely doing there's definitely a lot more to it than what I'm saying right here, but
But I mean, it kind of makes sense.
Gets the idea across to people who don't know what they're.
Johnny, do you have a response to that?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's definitely coming more into play nowadays than it was when it first started. And
is it viable, you think, as an alternative?
I think there are better options out there.
There are. I would agree with that.
Such as, but I mean, that's kind of the question here, though. Like, what would be better than that? Because ultimately, one step at a time, you want to get to the best system that works, and it's, humanity's evolving, and it's just one step at a time.
I say we just go back to the days of writing personal checks. They're going to bounce the second we leave the door. It's like just write that check to Walmart with $400 worth of shit, crap in my. I can edit that. Just walk out of Walmart with like $400 worth of crap in my cart, and write a little check and be like, it's going to bounce, but I'll be long gone by the time that happens. So 3
years later, you get a firm saying you check fraud.
Exactly.
Is up here.
Okay. Speaking of, I'm glad you said that, Johnny. That's one thing I forgot to mention real quickly about the Fed. So this is, you probably saw this, I don't know if you got that far in the Zeitgeist documentary, but when they talk about the Fed.
You're talking about like the crash?
All right, so basically this is how currently, and tell me if this makes sense to you, currently this is how our monetary system is structured. The very first dollar in America was created by the Fed, right? Once they created the Federal Reserve, that was the place. So first of all, the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's a private institution.
I knew that.
It is not controlled by the government. They say it's regulated by the government, but it's a private institution. And it benefits the chair people, whatever.
Right.
So every dollar that's printed is loaned to the government at interest. So every single dollar, beginning with the first dollar, was loaned at interest.
Right.
So that in and of itself, you tell me how
doesn't make sense.
There will ever be a way to pay off the debt when every single dollar is loaned to the government at interest.
Well,
I mean that's a mathematical problem. The only way to pay the debt is to print more money, and that's the problem.
Or for the Federal Reserve to actually become a federal entity.
No, the only way that we will ever pay off the debt is if the Federal Reserve totally forgave it. Just straight up said, listen, we get it. You're right, guys. That doesn't make sense, but we had you going for a while, didn't we?
We've just been making money off
And how the hell did that happen? How did that point by itself is so clear? You're creating a system that is digging a hole.
Right, yeah.
Like, literally digging a hole.
I would bet part of it has to do with the founding fathers. They were really trying to get away from, and this is just speculation, wild speculation on my part. When America was first being founded, when Franklin and Jefferson and all of them were, huddled around a table writing out the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, part of their thing was they were trying to get away from this dictatorial kind of monarchy,
Emphasis on dictatorship.
Yeah. And part of that was trying to make the government as out of people's lives as possible, I guess is a good way to say it.
But that was their point.
Well, yeah, and so not the government not controlling the money was one way they would have pulled them. I know it's still
well, it's kind of the opposite, to be honest. They wanted a system where everything was So when they created the land of the free, honest to God, this was their intention. Do you know how many laws? So think of today, okay, and how pervasive law is, and how it controls and literally tries to legislate how we live. For example, gay people used to not be able to get married.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case when they seceded.
That's true.
They wanted, and it's this simple, they wanted a world that was free. They wanted a world that basically abided by the golden rule. And we talked about that before, where people were free to do whatever the hell they wanted to do as long as it didn't adversely affect other people.
Right.
And that's how simple their concept was. And how much now have we totally screwed that up?
Gotta love selfish people.
And yeah, it astonishes me that people don't get it, you know, or even if they do get it, they don't. Like that matters so much. And how many people have their lives constrained and controlled because of these corrupt politicians, and what's happened since then? And again, that's what happens. That's history for you. And eventually, unless things somehow magically get better, we'll see what Trump does and his administration does. But it's going to end up the same way. You know, people will get pushed so far where they have no other. They'd rather literally die than continue to live in the system that has been created. So I don't know. It's a very depressing situation. I mean, it really is just a very depressing world. But anyway, so before that Fed kind of tangent there, what were we talking about before that? The money. So that was Will's answer. So, and I asked you, so if Bitcoin, if it could be improved, what could be improved? Like, what could be a better system than that? And this is where you get really, this is where the creative people thrive. Because you can shape reality with a good idea.
Right, yeah.
You know? Hey, I get one. Finally.
Good.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I think I would want to stick with, on the whole, I hate to say that part of making it better would be finding a way to regulate it, because the whole thing we're trying to get away from is central banking, and and I'm not necessarily talking like a central bank kind of regulation, but just some sort of system or program that would ensure it, so that if not even that long ago, like I want to say a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, one of the main Bitcoin distributors got hacked, and people lost like $24 million.
Yeah, see, that's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and that's a huge risk.
So if there were a way to make it less risky, and I mean, not that it's that risky anyway, because like I said, there are plenty of ways to keep it in a type of situation where you're not going to be hackable, or you'll have it basically in a wallet. But not everybody's going to have those little devices. So if there's a way to regulate it and insure it and make it to where if the provider of the Bitcoin gets hacked and the Bitcoin gets stolen,
kind
or
of like how the FDIC
they insure the money.
Yeah. So that's kind of this is the kind of conversation that people that make these policies need to start having. But the question, I guess, the devil's advocate question in that case would be, once you decide whatever authority is going to regulate it, how do you keep them from corrupting?
Right. No,
and it's the kind of it repeats itself.
It's a vicious cycle.
How do you regulate them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you regulate the ones, because they're going to be in bed together. So, I mean, and it is. It's just a human condition problem. It really is. And because there aren't many individuals probably on this planet that are genuinely concerned and truly do want what's best for everyone.
Right.
Because we are a selfish species. I mean, we're a competitive species. It's simple nature. It's not even that we're evil. It's just we are animals.
We are. Yeah.
But did you guys have any other questions or points on that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Your question for what would you do to make it better?
Okay. So I would change humanity, honestly. I would change our value system. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it, and that's why, like I said, my opinion of this problem is far-fetched to what we're taught and what we pretty much think. I mean, I'm no different until, like I said, my mom died and my worldview and perception of reality changed and my priorities changed. But I think we have been so carefully directed into a mentality of valuing things that ultimately really are meaningless when it comes down to what's truly important to fundamentally living and existing as a creature on the planet. That is what has given these powers that be the ability to control us, because we care about money. We care about status. We care about having a bigger house than our neighbor. Mm-hmm. That is the fundamental problem that needs to be changed. And until that changes, this will always happen. And we will never, ever change anything. It has to be literally has to be a shift in consciousness and in a very, from the most cognitive level that fixes this. Because the only reason they have any power is because we give it to them by caring about the shit they have to provide. Yeah.
What is it?
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, when you get on that point, what is it? When the immovable force meets the impassable object. I'm butchering that idiom, but basically when the all powerful force meets the object that can't be moved.
Yeah. When Iron Man meets like Superman or something.
Right, or like
analogy, but I get your point.
Yeah. What you're looking at right there is a lot. You hit on the human vanity. Is something you will never get past. I mean, I hate to put such a.
But will you?
See, that's my thing. I hate to say never because it's awfully ultimatum.
Because you're surrendering.
Yeah, I know. But you look
maybe you're smarter. I don't know. Honestly,
you just look at how things have gone so far. A lot of the big blow-ups that happen are because somebody thinks they're better than somebody else, or somebody values themselves.
It is all ego.
It's all ego. It's all
ego.
And to say, I mean, you're always. Not you specifically, but it's just like random human man or woman is always. Yeah, they're always going to desire.
That's why the alpha male concept exists.
Yeah, and I think, especially with money, part of you'd have to get past human vanity.
Money is the fundamental. I mean, the measurement, that system of somebody's worth.
Yeah,
literally their worth. And
worth,
people are so egotistic and vain that they look and judge people on their character on how much money which is disgusting, but it is. You're right. It's human nature. Donnie,
I think first off, Will, anything can be changed. So, and if it's not direct,
amen, Johnny,
that thing, then you can go to something else and change the way that thing is related to that. So anything can be changed. I wanted to say that first. Second, the fundamentals of money, you look at it this way, more money is going to buy you a bigger house. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants a bigger house and more space to live in.
So agreeing with me.
So if you were to change that perception, if you were to change not so much the way money is what it is, if you were to change the whole, I don't want to say
like you wouldn't care about money could still exist, but if you really didn't care about the it wouldn't matter nearly
as you were saying
you could
earlier.
Still use it as a mechanism to trade because you'll always need that.
You just got to make it not the most important thing out
right.
When you were saying earlier, we are a very what is the word you use? Competitive, and we're very selfish, and we want big and better for ourselves. So there are other. That's not going to change. That's just who we are as human nature. Maybe it changes 100 years from now. Who knows? But for right now,
I'll comment on that afterwards.
This is what we have to deal with. So there are other ways you can go about changing those things. But
it's basically a task of manipulating people's minds the same way these people have manipulated minds throughout the entire history of humanity. Somebody has to manipulate it in the right direction, and that is the only thing that will ever change this. Now, the thing that I think is important, and the one thing that when I think about this and how the question of what you guys are saying of whether or not it is capable of happening, because it is tied to our intrinsic just fabric of being an animal. This is the way I see it. Human beings are, and I'm not looking like if people have creationist theories or whatever, I'm not trying to offend here, but I don't agree that we were just planted here randomly. I think we were evolution. The Darwinian theory of that evolution exists. Human beings are the only species in the history of planet Earth that have ever transcended their instincts as an animal. human beings had somehow, I don't know how, there's lots of theories. Like, there's one theory that say that they ate a bunch of psychedelics and got really creative and changed. Anyway, the point is, human beings have developed the intelligence to be able to get past the, like, for example, back before this, the alpha male mentality is what basically controls the animal kingdom.
Right, yeah.
Right? So you have the head caveman wanting to come. Now, we're smart enough to have the self-discipline to control ourselves and perhaps our instincts, because we understand that there's a perception involved of us from other people.
Yeah.
So human beings are the only species that have ever accomplished that ability to transcend their instincts. So that, I think, to me, is just, that's one step in that evolution of getting rid and harnessing our behavior and getting rid of these carnal desires. So
that's a good point.
That's a good point, for sure.
It's a good way of looking at it.
And I think that all that ties into the reason we're so vain is that alpha mentality. And I think we are capable, eventually.
Of getting past
I just think it's going to have to be something that catches. That's it. I mean, everything's an idea.
Yeah.
You know, they say an idea can change the world. If enough people got to the point where they got it and they really just didn't give a shit about what car they drove, and they truly cared about their relationships with people and the things that really, because this whole vanity thing, you can have the biggest house, it's a very empty result. I mean, the wealthiest people I know are probably more unhappy than some of the
most people. Yeah.
So if we ever graduated, you know, into our next level of intellect, it's absolutely possible, if you ask me. So
I completely agree, but that's kind of what I'd like to talk about. At the same time, what I think would help us now in today's time, and not looking at the future in 100 years to see if anything changes.
Term, yeah.
But like today, I think education would be the biggest.
What do you mean?
So most people today, they don't really know much about finance or.
So you're saying inform them?
Yeah, inform, because when you're
not like in school, you're saying like
in school you're not really. Let's say
even in school, that'd be a great chance to teach them.
Be better in common core.
Yeah, I mean,
Virginia.
Yeah, no.
Besides knowing the Pythagorean theorem or whatever,
they gave me a
take into consideration the fact that none of our and I don't know other states' education standards, but
they all suck.
What if?
Probably all
from
better
what I
in Tennessee,
hear,
though.
But what if they were taught to handle taxes?
I'd love to know how to do my taxes.
And what if they were
taught to actually help you?
Balance a checkbook.
Preposterous.
Trade stocks. Without taking a certain class after you get out of high school.
I feel like at some point balancing a checkpoint's not going to mean much anymore. I mean, just to be honest.
Just to know how to
handle things go the way I want them to, a checkbook won't even exist.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Being able to know how to handle finances and having an education in the money in general. Yeah, I think that's going to be a start.
And you mentioned that on the educational reform.
I mean, there's a big. There's a reason why people don't really know much about. There's a reason people don't know what the word brokerage means.
And guess who controls public schools? A lot of their curriculum. But I mean, you're right. I mean, I think the whole education. I mean, that's really what all of this is. And that's the whole point of what we're doing is to expose. Is not to influence people's opinions. Like I'm perfectly fine with people saying that guy's freaking crazy for saying we can give him money. I don't care. That's fine. The whole point is to at least think about it and consider, you know, what else could be done to change the world and make it truly function how it should function. Yeah. How the world should work.
Right.
You know, and that's really the whole point of all of these things. So anyway, we could again go on forever with all of these things, you know, and. Wheels that are turning. But is there anything else? Obviously, like always, we're going to end up with a poem. Is there anything else that you guys want to add, by the way? Not even related. Is there anything else that one of these days, when one of you gentlemen get the apparel thing done,
we'll get that working on. Yeah.
Properly delegate our tasks and commit the effort required to accomplish them, we will get that done and roll that out. But I do want to say, let's wish luck to Chad's car and hopefully everything works out with him. But do y'all have anything else to add about anything in general before we get into the poem?
No.
Okay. All right, so the poem that I actually forgot to write, so we just took a break for a minute, paused the recording so I could write it, is called Let's Get to Work. And this is how it goes. Where the hell do we start, guys? There's so much work we must do. The path ahead is so scary, so hold up. First, a brew. Okay, time to work. Let's destroy these bad folks. One thing I assure you, this ass whipping's no hoax. But for real, all you people, can you imagine a world where our tangled existence has completely uncurled? When corruption's defeated and our lives are our own, so please, let's make this effort to finally reap what we've sown. And that was it. Just 4 quick verses there, but kind of illustrates what we've been talking about here. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in and sticking with us for these 8 episodes. And we are going to announce right now that next episode, number 9, is our season 1 finale. It is going to wrap things up. We're going to take a break and focus more on the actual nonprofit side of things. Because right now, I mean, so far we've been kind of tangled, as that poem would say, in the podcast.
Yeah.
But granted, the nonprofit kind of started from the podcast, but you know that's really the main thing that we're trying to accomplish. You know, and the podcast is really just a means or a mechanism to expose our message. So our plans, and we mentioned this earlier, but this is what we're really going to focus on after our next episode, is creating a database of people that would be willing to volunteer, that would like to make a difference, but really haven't, gone and seen what's out there and taken the time or whatnot. Because it is, I mean, we all got our lives. You know, it's something where it's not easy to commit time and effort, especially when you got a family and your own thing going on. So what we're going to do is we're working on creating partnerships with different organizations that host events where they need volunteers. And connect them with our database, and we'll have it set up where there's obviously an email update and any sort of announcements when we have these events like blood drives or anything really. I guess that's the benefit of having such a broad scope of how the world should work, is there's not really a niche other than trying to improve the world that we live in and help in whatever way we can. So that's our next step. But before that, obviously, like I said, next week we're going to be recording our season finale, which is going to be on religion. So we are really looking forward to that one. And it's not going to be something where we're arguing that people should believe, as always, that they should believe one thing or the other. It's just going to be, we're making sure we get a guest. I know one of which that we have scheduled right now. Ideally, we would like to find, we're working on finding at least 1 or 2 more to come to the table with different perspectives and explain why they believe what they believe. And again, not in an approach where you're trying to argue and convince somebody to believe what they believe. It's just they want to just lay it out there and say, this has been my journey and my struggle, and this is why I've resulted in my current beliefs. So we're really looking forward to that one. We saved it, obviously, because religion is probably the touchiest of subjects that one can even approach in any sort of arena. So because it's such a important, and it really defines a lot of people and who they are. So we're really looking forward to that. But again, thank you guys for tuning in. And until next week, thank you.